Today, we are so excited to have Shirley Wren, who is currently an economics student at Princeton University. Her family immigrated to Canada when she was 12 years old in 2014, where she faced challenges such as language barrier, culture shock, and so much more for a foreign student. Yet these obstacles didn't stop her from becoming the successful leader that she is today. What she's done in high school is that Shirley was the York Region President's Council Minister of Finance. She also took positions like the Student Council President, the DECA Club President, and founder of TED Ed Public Speaking Club. Along with participating in many extracurricular activities, she received countless achievements, such as York Region's Top Scholar in 2020, Governor General Academic Medal, Ontario Principals Council Leadership Award, and National Financial Literacy Competition Champion, where she received a scholarship from the University of Waterloo at only grade 10. So in today's episode, Shirley is going to be covering how she managed the language barrier, the culture shock, her study habits, how she's balancing time and time management and strategies, and what it takes to get into Ivy League universities like Princeton. So without further ado, let's get started with Shirley Wren. I'd just like you to walk us through how you manage that whole culture shock.
When I came to Canada when I was 12, I actually was in Saskatchewan for 2 years before I came to Ontario right before high school. And I would say that culture shock and language barrier kind of go hand in hand because there are a lot of new words that I didn't understand. I didn't feel confident to speak. And I also didn't know that if my English was good enough. And at that time, I didn't know what things like poutine was. I remember seeing it wrong the first time I tried to order it and felt really embarrassed. So those things like that. And I think another really major aspect of this is really the community, because when you look at Canada, when you think about the Canadian culture, it's not necessarily the traditions, but perhaps the community and the multicultural aspect of it. And so that was a huge shock as well. And so I came from a pretty, I would say, uni-ethnic country, and coming to a multi-ethnic country, that's another aspect. And so I would say some of the things that I really thought of throughout this journey that kind of helped me was that, one, I knew that I had to learn English very fast in order to both interact with others at school as well as to excel academically. And so that was the first goal that I had. And so in doing that, I tried to really interact with others even when I didn't feel super confident, by just starting a conversation and allowing myself some time to think before I speak, and making those friendly contacts with people around me. And I found that the kindness was really reciprocated. And so I was really able to find friends that way through school. And through that, I was also able to build a support network eventually for myself. And by that, I really just mean some teachers at school, some staff members that I interact with, my friends, obviously. And so I think having that support network really helped me to navigate through some of the resources. So for example, I remember coming to Ontario and going to high school. I think my guidance counselor was one of the first people who I was able to bond with over course selection, which is a very simple task. But then later going to her and asking her about academics and how to navigate through high school, I think she definitely became a mentor later on. So I think being able to connect with others and building that support network is really important, really, for anyone, whether or not you're an immigrant.
Did you ever speak English at all, or was it broken English? Where were you at when you came to Canada?
I would say I learned English at school for sure, but it's kind of like the level of French we learn here, so not very fluent. I would say it was pretty broken. I remember probably understanding about 20% of what my teachers and friends were saying when I just came. But something that I did was that, one, I really love to read. I love to read in Chinese, which is my native language, but also I read a lot of English books when I came. Really just fiction books, novels, nothing spectacular, but that really allowed me to build a vocabulary and allow me to learn some sentence structures and expressions that I can use in my writing. And so writing was the second thing that I did. I had a diary myself and tried to do it in English, so that helped as well. And lastly was really just to speak to others, even when I didn't feel confident. It was in doing that that allowed me to practice and really make my broken English turn into something that's more fluent.
So it's great that you have this amazing support group that you went out and you reach, and it makes a huge difference when you go out there and say, okay, I'd like to have a conversation with you in English so that I can improve my English. Outside of your own support network, are there resources that you use externally to improve your English language and also your cultural knowledge of Canada?
So I would actually say that something that I would say goes also with my academics is that I try to develop resources that are my own, and that really helps. So I'm not sure if that's super helpful to answer the question, but for example, something I did was that I kept a vocabulary book that I developed. So I find that, you know, there are vocabulary books out there, but if you just look at that and that's something someone else had organized, it's hard to ingrain those things. And so I developed this kind of system where I categorized different words and made up examples of where I would use them. And so I really do encourage everyone to try to create some resource for yourself and see if that's something that can really resonate with you and use that. But I would also say that practicing with others is so important, especially when you're already in the environment, when you're already in Canada. I can't think of a better way to improve other than speaking with others. I don't think using any app is better than a real human.
So no accent reduction, because you clearly your accent, it's so clear and everything. So there's no accent reduction courses that you went out to, or ESL or nothing of that sort. You didn't do any of those.
Well, I did have ASL class from school, but I didn't do any additional courses outside of school. And I think the accent is just a part of trying to imitate what others are saying and, you know, watching TV, listening to the radio and really old school things like that.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So tell me how, I mean, you were 12 years old, and when you started creating clubs, you need to also gain the respect of all these people. Did you feel the language barrier when you were learning and also trying to be a club president at the same time? Was there any challenges doing that, gaining the respect? And if there was, how did you gain the respect of people?
So I do have to say that I didn't start a club when I was 12. I only started, I think, in high school. Well, first of all, I tried to join some clubs to see how they work. And so I think through that, besides improving my English, it really built up my leadership skills. But I have to really admit that both in trying to get involved in building clubs, that there still exists a language bias, and it's something that I've experienced myself. So I have to be really, really honest about it. I think a part of the reason why I had to almost try to perfect my English, I can't say it's completely perfect, but really try, is that I thought that was kind of an indicator of your capability at that time, which I don't think is a healthy thought at all. And I don't think it's something that someone else should think about. And so I think now, after having graduated from high school, I'm really looking back and thinking that we need to empower anyone to not use any single measure as a measure of intelligence and capability. And so I think that's why towards the end of high school, I started a public speaking club to encourage students from different backgrounds to really use their voice, because regardless of how you speak English, it's your ideas that matter. And so I have to say that I did have those fears at the beginning, and it wasn't easy, and I did get rejected from a couple clubs and activities. But I guess perhaps naturally, perhaps something that I learned is that I need to be really resilient to carve out a space for myself and for my family. And so I persisted after those challenges. So it's not an easy process, I would say.
And Shirley, one last question. One of the things that, you know, some high school students go through, especially with the whole language barrier thing, is there is the popular set of kids who are running all these clubs and everything, and then there is them, or, you know, maybe you felt the same way where I'm not able to express myself. How did you ever have this, oh, there is the popular set of kids and I have to work, I have to either collaborate with them or compete with them to make a club, to form a club? Did you ever go through that?
Yeah, for sure. I totally understand where you're coming from. And I think My mindset is that everyone brings a different personality and skill set to the team. And so I absolutely respect everyone, regardless of, the popularity status. And I think that's something that I really think is really important to me, both as a community member and I guess as a leader of some clubs and projects. And so I try to think of ways that I can communicate with others in a way that works for them. But at the same time, I do think that it's easy to get caught up in this sort of popularity contest, especially in high school. And something that actually another woman tech leader said on International Women's Day a couple of days ago really resonated with me. She said to lead with integrity, treat others with respect, and not lose sight of what matters most. And I think those are some things that I try to keep in mind, and I will definitely keep in mind moving forward. And that really helps to reduce that kind of barrier between, popularity and respect, and perhaps neither. So yeah, I really hope that's something that the listeners can take away as well, because it really did help me.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing, because those are some of the things that prevent people from doing the wonderful things that you ended up doing with yourself, despite the fact that you had this language barrier. So thank you so much, Shirley. Over to Thanaja now for more questions.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to the more time management balance part of the podcast, Shirley. So I understand that you led a lot of different clubs in high school, like you're the president of student council, co-president of DECA. You led the TED Ed student speaker club. So my question is, how are you able to lead all these clubs at the same time while still excelling academically and even joining other extracurriculars outside of school?
Yeah, right. So I would say that there are three really important things that I think helped me. One was that I started to build good study habits early on in high school, and I also joined a couple clubs. And what that did was that my coursework wasn't as heavy back then, and I didn't have a leadership role per se in those clubs. And so I was able to get into a routine that I felt more comfortable with. And so later on in high school, when I was doing more challenging courses, perhaps applying to university and having these leadership roles, I already had this foundation. And so that really helped. And I think it's really important for students to work out a schedule that works for them. And this leads to my second point, which is how I actually manage my time from a day-to-day basis. I like to manage my time based on the location and resources that I'll have access to. So I don't necessarily think of, in the morning I'll do math, or in the afternoon I'll write an essay or things like that. I think of where I work the best, because I know that's where I'll be able to produce the most high quality work and to be able to work the most productively. So for example, I can't focus on writing an essay at school. I would leave that to at home, and I would, for example, work on math homework at school, and really even schedule when I'm going to talk to a teacher about a club, or when I'll meet with someone to discuss a project and things like that. So that really helped. And lastly, I would say it's really important to readjust your priorities once in a while. I do that once a week. I still do it. I think we can't take on everything at the same time. So having 3 to 4 really, really important things that you absolutely have to get done and do great on, I guess, per week would be kind of a way to reprioritize and readjust.
You mentioned in the start, one of the key strategies you used to balance all this was building a strong study foundation early on. So what are ways that, high school students can do this?
So again, I want to echo a point that I mentioned early on, which is to build a resource for yourself. And I do that really through note taking. I'm an avid note taker. I don't think my notes are super aesthetic, but I would say they're organized at least. And I think of creative ways to organize the information. For example, I remember especially for history, the teacher would have a very long PowerPoint with a lot of information, and then I tried to make them into bullet points and tables and charts that really help to organize and visualize the information in different ways. And so trying to be a bit creative with that and seeing how you learn best can really help. And then secondly, I also try to learn from different ways, from different sources. For example, I'm obviously listening in class. I read the textbook to get a different kind of explanation. And then sometimes I record myself explaining a concept and then listen to it, for example, when I'm doing chores, when I'm walking home or something like that. So I think having those different methods to kind of stimulate your brain to think about a topic can really help. And I don't necessarily actually follow a specific website, but I think Khan Academy in general does explain a lot of concepts pretty well, and I still find it a useful resource in university.
Yes, Khan Academy is definitely amazing. But okay, so let's say you're having your final exams, right? How are you planning that out? Because you're going to need to study for more than a couple different courses at a time. How are you preparing and planning out your week?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny that you ask because I just had my midterms week. But I would say something I do is that about 2 weeks before the exam week, I would start reviewing some of the notes, but in a more casual way, as well as look at specific problems that I was struggling with, perhaps when I was going through the course, and as well as to catch up readings, I guess, for the humanities and social sciences. And then about the weekend before that, I would really use that time to do a couple practice tests and to hopefully, if I have time, to make a reference sheet for myself. But that can also be created, I guess, the week during the exam or the week right before. So that's exactly what I did this past week as well, is to have those different stages of studying. First of all, just kind of reviewing notes and then doing more rigorous practice. And lastly, using that reference sheet as an opportunity to consolidate that information once again. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. So when you mentioned reference sheet, is that just sort of like a summary of what you need to know, what you need to remember?
Yeah, exactly. I would try to limit it to, I would say 2 pages double-sided for something like a midterm, probably 4 pages double-sided for a final. It's really to consolidate the information and again, think of the most concise ways that you can summarize a piece, because that really gets you to think more deeply about the topic.
One of the biggest obstacles is getting distracted, right? And, how do you stay productive?
Perhaps setting up a reward system for yourself where you would do a couple problems and then look at something else for a couple minutes. And by something else, I don't necessarily mean YouTube. I mean, even like reading a couple pages of a different book. I know that sounds super boring, but I kind of do this switch between humanities and super math and science-based courses to keep myself on track. And I find that helpful to stimulate my brain a little bit as well.
Could you walk us through your application process for Princeton?
First of all, I'm going to skip the research process because you do need to do a ton of research on the school as well as the application process itself, but I'll just walk you through, I guess, the application package itself and what it includes. And so first of all, you do need to submit your grades for all 4 years, which is different from Ontario, where you only submit your top 6 grade 12 courses. And I think that in itself implies that you do have to work pretty hard throughout high school and keep those grades up. And then secondly, you have the standardized testing, which I think is something that really stresses students out. You have to do your SAT or ACT, perhaps the SAT subject tests or AP exams. And so those are things, again, that kind of take place before you start applying, and usually in grade 10 or 11. And on the application itself, you get to list usually about 10 extracurricular activities, 5 of the most important awards that you've gotten, as well as write a long personal statement, about 650 words, I believe. So that's really an essay for you to write on any topic, really. And then for each school, there is a series of long or short essays, depending on the length, I guess. They range from 2 to 11 essays. I think that's the most I had. And then, so those are the portions that you get to create yourself during the application process. And they typically get done in the fall semester of grade 12. And then you have the recommendation letters from your guidance counselor and 2 teachers. So those are, again, things that you have to source during that period. And so those are all the things that go into the application package. And in addition to that, there are some optional, or I would say follow-up pieces. One is an art or music portfolio. I personally submitted a visual arts and creative writing portfolio. But I think for athletes, it's a totally different story. I'm not even going into that territory. And then you can either submit a video portfolio or have an interview with an alumni from the school. And so I did have that for a couple of the schools that I applied to as well. Yeah, I know that was a ton of information. I hope I didn't speak too fast.
No, that really helped. Thank you. So could you tell us what resources are available for students to practice for SAT tests or interviews?
Yeah, for sure. And again, I would say Khan Academy really helps for SAT because they have this kind of tailored system where they look at your strength based on what questions you've gotten right and wrong to really tailor that practice. And they also have a lot of full length tests, which I think help as well. But again, I would say creating a resource for yourself is something that's so important. And what I did was that I kind of recorded what types of questions I got wrong and the reasons that I got them wrong. So I would remember that next time. And so from that, I kind of extracted some tips for myself that then I consolidated into a package. I don't think that copying the exact package I had is the right way to go because everyone's so different. And what I found challenging may be super easy for someone. And so again, really reflecting when you're learning something and thinking about what's a way to prevent that mistake from happening again goes for studying for anything, whether it's SAT or a course. And then for interviews, I also prepared a list of questions and some of my answers to them before the interview. So they would focus on my experiences, goals, my passions, skills, but I also made sure I had examples that I could bring up for each question. And I did a lot of research on the school so I could talk about specific opportunities that I'm interested in. But also, I really do think the interview is an opportunity for you to ask the alumni how they felt when they were studying there and to get a better sense of what the school is really like. I don't know how much the interview factors into the application, but it's really kind of this mutually beneficial process.
So when applying to Princeton, how did you make sure that you stood out as a candidate compared to all the other thousands of people that applied? What were the key things and specific steps that you took to make sure that you stood out?
Right, yeah, that's really the million-dollar question. Unfortunately, I don't think I have an answer to it because I don't know what the admission officer was thinking. But I would say that at least some things that I thought of during the application process is that I would say the schools are really looking for people with potential because they do want successful alumni who, um, you know, either become experts in their fields or can give back to the school. And so thinking about how your past experiences and your skills and knowledge demonstrate that potential is really important. It's not necessarily about winning a gold medal at Science Olympics, because that's a great accomplishment, but what does that really translate to? It may translate to perseverance, curiosity, maybe your expertise in a specific field. And so thinking about those things and how you can use your essays as a way to illustrate those values and those traits, I think is really important. And that's what I made sure to do. I made sure that I used my voice and I was very authentic in all of my essays and that they can articulate the values that I want to demonstrate to the school. And it's also important to note that each school is a bit different. I think Princeton specifically is very focused on academics as well as service. And those were some of the things that I was able to demonstrate from my application as well. But some schools may be looking for creativity or entrepreneurship or other things. So doing that research also helps. And I would also say, lastly, that after applying to all of these schools and after going through that reflection process about what are your interests, what are your strengths, and what you want to do in the future, you kind of get this sense of your goals and ambitions. And it really didn't matter that much at the end of the day what school you go to. I don't think getting into Harvard or Princeton is where your future ends. It's really where your future starts. So regardless of if you go to U of T or Yale, it doesn't matter as long as you know what you are striving for and how you'll leverage the resources available to you to reach that.
So what were your 3 top choices for university and why'd you choose Princeton?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I had Princeton, also the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business, as well as U of T. So I would say Wharton is definitely great, but I didn't want to be in a professionally oriented undergrad program. I wanted something that's a bit more liberal arts. And so that would allow me to explore a few more different fields. And then for U of T, again, a great school, but I think the student population is quite large. And so I was looking for more of a smaller school environment. And I think Princeton just had the right combination of research opportunities, really a commitment to knowledge and the truth from the entire school, as well as a very, I think, dedicated culture a culture dedicated to service. So those were all things that really matched my personal values. And obviously not to mention the really small student population, their focus on undergrad education, a ton of resources and amazing faculty. And at the end of the day, it just seemed like the right place to be, that can allow me to explore different things and really strive for my future goals.
So the last question I have is, like, a huge reason that pushes students away from these schools, just it's too costly, too expensive, and they don't consider the financial aid options. So what are some financial aid sources that's out there, and do they cover a significant amount of tuition fees?
Yeah, so first of all, from the schools themselves, for sure. So when you think about US private colleges, there are 5 schools that offer financial aid to both domestic and international applicants, and they don't take financial need into consideration in the application. Princeton is one of them, and Princeton, I think, does have the reputation of giving the most generous aid. I think it would cost me more to go to Western or Queens than go to Princeton at the end of the day. So definitely a very affordable option as well. And then there are a couple schools that offer financial aid for international students, but they also take it into consideration when they're looking at your application. So that's, again, something that you just have to consider. But overall, the premise is if you get in, they'll make sure that you're able to attend. And obviously there are other scholarships out there. There are a few smaller ones sponsored by different companies and foundations. I think Scholartree is a really good resource. I think they have, I forget if it's Scholarship Tree or Scholartree, but anyways, it's this resource that has a ton of scholarships on there for Canadian students. You can also find a couple perhaps through your school, especially for the major scholarships at Canadian universities. So definitely making use of those opportunities and staying kind of on top of things is quite important during that grade 12 year. So I would say it's really important to consider the financials and to discuss with your family and everything. But at the end of the day, I hope it won't be a factor that prevents you from applying to some of these schools, because you never know how feasible they actually might be.
So that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much for all the details and resources you provided. Over to you, Annie.
No problem.
I think, Thanuja, you had a few questions, so why don't you go for it?
Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, Shirley, what would you say were the key steps that you took in high school that really helped you make it to Princeton? Like, was it academics or was it extracurriculars? Like, what were the key things that helped you?
Right, yeah, so if we're kind of breaking down the application, I would say I did have pretty solid academics. I think that's something that I focused on. Obviously, grades are really important, but I also just genuinely enjoy learning in general. So I like to use a bit of creativity as well in my academics. So that's definitely something that I think got me past the threshold of academic assessment for these schools, but I wouldn't say it was kind of the final deal. I think that my extracurriculars helped a lot as well. I remember my UPenn admissions officer writing to me and saying that a lot of the leadership roles that I had really stood out to her, especially with DECA and another business society outside of school, student council, all of those things. So that's something that someone told me, and I guess I can share that. And lastly, I would say my essays really helped as well. I chose to focus on my immigrant experience in my personal essay to all of the schools. And that's actually something that's advised against when you go on YouTube or search on Google for college admissions tips, because they say it's a really overused topic. The reason why I chose it regardless is that it's really something that's so significant to my identity that I feel if I leave it out of my application, I wouldn't be myself. And I think kind of sticking to your values and using your authentic voice in those essays is something that's going to paint a whole picture that really backs up what you're saying with your academics and extracurriculars.